obviously look the same age as a lot of you people here. In fact, I'm a child of the 1960s. And in the 1960s, we started getting this environmental movement going. We started thinking about what is it like to do things and save the planet. And in fact, when I was a little kid, Christmas was much different in my house than it was in many other houses. Because what we actually did is every year we unwrap our Christmas presents, and I would say, stop, we can't waste that paper. And I would make my parents fold up all the paper, the wrapping paper, really nicely, put it away, and use it again next year. So in the past, people used to do things like this, and we have to ask ourselves the question, why now are we not actually looking at these types of same issues? And most importantly, why now as we're looking at these global issues of climate change, of sustainability, of water resources, are we wasting resources that we currently have at our disposal? So this talk is going to be a little bit of a journey around some of the work that myself and the students here at Strathclyde University are doing, and give you an idea of how we could potentially stop what I call groundwater graveyards. For those of you who haven't heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, last year the whole world signed up that we're going to start making sure that the planet is going to be a better place to live. So there's a whole series of different goals, and this talk right here is going to address one of those goals. It's the one goal number 6 on sustainable water and sanitation. So I'd like you all to sit back and relax a little bit, and we're going to take a journey to try to understand what this is all about. Now, we hear about the amount of money it's going to take to fix the world. We hear about the investments. We hear about the debt that many of the developing countries are burdened under. So by the end of this talk, I want you guys to be going away and thinking to yourselves, what am I going to be spending my hard-earned money on to make the sustainable goals happen? So if I were to give you right now $1 billion, what would you actually do with it? And that's the question you want to do after this is take that $1 billion bill, put it in that pocket, and walk away and figure out how you're going to make that investment actually make a more sustainable world. So the area that I'm most interested in is water. I started becoming interested in water when I was a kid. I was really into environmental issues. And to me, it was fascinating. I was a swimmer, so I had to spend many, many hours in the pool. Maybe that's the reason I became obsessed with studying water. But actually, when we started looking around the entire globe, water is one of the key elements to life. The interesting thing when you look at the globe from outer space, again, I was a child of the 60s, and we first started seeing these pictures coming back on the television when I was a kid. It was, ooh, wow, look, that's a planet. You know, we never looked at the planet like that before. The fact that we can see the planet like that, we know that the planet is mostly covered in water. And in fact, as you can see, there's 71% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, and most of that is seawater. When we start looking at the fresh water that's available on the planet, most of all the fresh water that's available on the planet is tied up in glaciers and in the polar ice caps. There's really a small amount of fresh water that's actually liquid, and in fact, when you look, most of that available water is groundwater. How many of you realize that 97.6% of all the available water that you have to come out of your tap is currently available as groundwater? Probably not many. And that's why we enjoy going out there and trying to help people to understand what this groundwater is all about and what it means to life. But when we look at the global hydrologic cycle, we tend to see the things, the rainfall, the snowfall, the ice caps. We see rivers, lakes, and oceans. But that big hysteresis, that big time lag in the way that water goes around the globe is oftentimes focused on that groundwater flow. So let's look at how old your water actually is. When you turn a tap on, okay, how old is the water that's in your tap? How old is the water that's in your bottle of water that you have right in front of you? Well, if it's inside of you, it's probably only a few days, or potentially even a few hours old, depending upon what cup of tea you were having last night at your local establishment. So when we start talking about biological water, we're talking about minutes, days, hours, type of time frames. When we start looking at the oceans, you're talking thousands of years is the mean lifetime of water. You get into groundwater systems, and the mean lifetime of groundwater can be from years, decades, all the way up to hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, when we get to polar ice, it can be even up to millions of years. So the reality is the way water goes around the globe has a very interesting timeline to it. The other thing that people don't teach about when they talk about climate change is that major greenhouse gas in the entire global system is water vapor. The other ones are tiny in comparison because water vapor transports all the heat around the entire globe. So let's get back to that Sustainable Development Goals. Let's get back to what we're actually talking about. And let's start thinking about what this water is really all about. Well, first of all, if we don't have access to water, we therefore don't have access to life. So therefore, it's one of the underpinning things that we have to have. That water and sanitation services not only gives us what we can do to live on a day-by-day basis, but it also underpins health and well-being. It underpins the economy, it underpins energy, and it underpins the time we have to do things to be more productive. And then one of the questions that I always ask as a hydrogeologist is, if groundwater is so important, then why are there not more hydrogeologists that are actually taking care of the global planet's water? So that's one of the questions we have to ask. Why, if there's so much groundwater there, aren't there a plethora of hydrogeologists everywhere telling you about this? Well, the reason is it's somewhat complicated. For a hydrogeologist, we have to use our imagination because the imagination allows us to understand what's underneath the earth. It also requires us to understand science and engineering. It requires innovation day by day as we're trying to put water resources, groundwater resources to good use. And importantly, it clearly helps people. So it makes you feel good as a hydrogeologist. It also influences global policy, and most important, is damn fun, okay? If I wasn't doing something every day that was fun, why am I actually doing that? Now this, my friends, is an aquifer. It's a nice, hard piece of sandstone, and that's what hydrogeologists will tend to actually try to target when they're drilling a borehole. So I'm going to recharge this aquifer as I'm talking. And what we as hydrogeologists do as our magic is to actually take rocks like this, which then are recharged with water like that, and find ways of getting that water back out of the rocks and deliver it to your homes for you to drink. Now, what a great, great thing to be able to do on a day-by-day basis. So, as a hydrogeologist, one of the things we have to start going back and asking ourselves the question is, how are we actually going to make the world a more sustainable place? These Sustainable Development Goals are really, really important. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. Here at Strathclyde University, one of our alumni was a guy called David Livingstone. David Livingstone went to South Central Africa and did all kinds of work there in missionary work and also on reducing slavery. And in the country of Malawi, there's a really strong affinity between here in Scotland and Malawi because of David Livingstone. So when I came here to Strathclyde University and I started teaching hydrogeology, everybody says, oh, you need to go there because that's really quite interesting. So I'm going to share some of that story with you right now and what we've actually done. Well, when I first started going out about a decade ago, I met up with an NGO called Water for People who were really, really quite innovative. And that innovation, they started thinking not only about what can we do now with the Millennium Development Goals, but what can we do about making sure everyone forever had water and sanitation. So they started off looking at the total number of people and the total amount of water that was needed and putting real dollar signs against the amount of infrastructure that was going to be needed. So in 2011, when we started working with them, we were able to come up with a figure between $15 and $18 million was needed to make sure that everyone had water and sanitation. About 500,000 people in a district of Chickasaw were there by 2018. So the question was, as we started getting more and more people to take that $1 billion out of their pocket, put it into investments, and through time what was happening, we then started mapping every single water point and trying to ask what was happening throughout the entire time. So between the times 2011, 2012, 14, 15, and then finally 2016, we have mapped every single water point, every single pit latrine, waste pit, and everything that could be influencing water supplies. And what I'm going to show you next is what we've learned on that journey. First of all, when you look at a lot of the infrastructure that was going in, the infrastructure that was going in wasn't necessarily the type of thing I think you and I expected to be seeing. Oftentimes it wasn't put in with the highest standards, or over time it wasn't maintained and it fell into disrepair. So we started working together with the government and started asking ourselves, how can we actually get the local communities to be much more engaged? Because this community-based management, like you saw on the last slide, wasn't necessarily working, we started thinking, well, can they actually use the wasted water and grow crops? Can they make more money? Can they set up banks, community banks, that they can actually share that money around? And from that, have enough money then to ultimately maintain that water supply for the local community. And sure enough, when you did this, they now had, as a local resource, a capacity to be able to manage that water resource and take care of it. Not only that, but the data, because we're measuring every single point across the entire district, and we also knew how many people were in each village and how many women were in each village, we could actually then say, where are the women most impacted by having to walk long distances to get their water? And if we actually then were able to target those areas, those villages where the women were most impacted by having to walk long distances, and say that's where you put your next resource, your most sustainable resource, then we can actually make their lives much better. And as you can see there, between 2011 and 2014, for that one village right there, the women went from on a daily average of over 5 kilometers going down to less than a kilometer, about 500 meters, to go and actually get their water. That's a lot of walking and a lot of time that's actually saved. So, people were putting their money in their hand in their pocket, getting money out. They were actually starting to invest in these water resources. And as they were investing in the water resources, the number of water resources started going up. In fact, between 2012 and 2014, there was an 18% increase in the total number of water resources. Fantastic! On the Millennium Development Goals, yeah, we're doing great stuff. We're really making a difference. Put the brakes on. We started looking not only at how many were there, but are they actually working? And when you looked at the functionality of this, between those time frames, the functionality only went up by 2%. Which means that the investment we were putting in on the Millennium Development Goals was failing faster than we were actually putting it in. That's not very good. Would you want to be buying a car and have a break before you actually got it? Why would we want to do this for a water supply in some part of rural Africa? So, there's been more and more people starting to look at issues around this functionality and whether or not there's actually a big problem looming. And what's happening is we're starting to see things coming out in the newspaper that are starting to point fingers. Now, I don't think we should point fingers. I think what we should do is we should all come together and say, I'm part of this problem. What part of it am I playing? And most importantly, how can I get together with the entire supply chain? How can I get together with everyone and make this fundamentally change for a sustainable future? Let's not point fingers at the past. Let's actually look to the future. So, I think on the Sustainable Development Goals, what we need to be doing is we need to be moving from reactive, oh my gosh, it broke, I gotta find money and I gotta get it fixed and we gotta do something about it, to proactive management. We need to give people the self-reliance to be able to manage their own resources, and most importantly, for them to then, on a periodic basis, go out and check whether or not something needs to be fixed before it breaks down. We would do that with our cars. We would change our oil in the car. You wouldn't wait till the car stopped and say, oh, I better put some more oil in it. Okay? If we're not doing that now with that type of engineering, why with water engineering are we just sitting there waiting for a breakdown before we actually try to fix it? And then what was the other great one? The Millennium Development Goals were a series of goals and they were very targeted. And as we targeted them, we didn't think of the connection between the two. And I'll point one out here, which is on sanitation. Sanitation wanted everyone to have their own local pit latrine or their own local source of sanitation. And the water wanted everyone to actually have a water supply. We already knew from a long time ago that individual points of pollution can cause contamination of the water supplies. But what nobody bothered to actually do is plot the two of them actually together. And this is what the result of the MGDs turned out to be. You had lots and lots of boreholes and lots of pit latrines all within a close proximity to each other. Therefore, there's now an infrastructure in place that has a long-term risk. And therefore, if we get people to actually manage and maintain their water resources appropriately, then they can actually look at keeping those types of risks to a minimum. And more importantly, when we look at the way people have put in infrastructure, like on the left, one borehole in this village, it was put in with standard Millennium Development Goal approaches where you try to get as much water as you possibly can. They didn't seal up at the top of it to have contamination from pit latrines, and more importantly, as we found out, there's salty water in the top end. So this borehole ended up being saline. We looked, when we drilled right next to it, that there's salt water there, and by sealing that bit up right there with termite mound clay, we're able to get fresh water from these zones, and more importantly, we're able to keep the contamination from the pit latrines getting into the boreholes. Then people are using these water supplies every day. Nobody's actually looking at how much water is coming out for it, and is there enough recharge every year? See it's recharging? See, look at that, it's going down, okay? Recharge every year goes slowly into the ground. Are we taking more water out than is actually being put in? So we need to give the communities the opportunity for them to actually look at this, because you'll get to a certain point, and when you get to that certain point, it's harder to get water out, or actually the well will go dry. So how you actually design that is really, really important. So this comes back to the groundwater graveyards. There are technologies that are developed under Sustainable Development Goals, and those technologies ended up failing. What we have actually done, this is a student here from Strathclyde University, and we've developed new infrastructure that can go into existing boreholes to actually replicate and use all this other materials that was invested before, and then use that same infrastructure in certain water supply situations. So what we need to do now is find new, innovative, exciting ways of actually making these groundwater resources sustainable. If we carry on with the business as usual, that $1 billion will be another $1 billion, will be another $1 billion. If we find a way to have systemic change, then we can actually make sure there's a long-term sustainability. So you have to ask yourself this question. I'm this itty-bitty person right here. How am I going to make this huge change actually happen? Well, hopefully all of you actually have a $1 billion bill in your pocket right now, and you can go out and actually start spending it. You don't have $1 billion in your pocket? Okay, well, what we can do is we can ask those that we donate to. The small amounts that we give can actually then be used and leveraged to actually produce sustainable resources. So ask the people that you're donating to make sure that they're actually putting in sustainable resources. If you're part of the system, become part of the change. Don't just accept business as usual. If you have skills, like as a hydrogeologist, as a fun guy out there having hydrogeology, use those to your advantages, and most importantly, every single one of you, every single day, start thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you start doing that, making it part of your life, and you get everyone to do that, then lots of people with small changes will end up with a big result. It's by all of us coming together and finding that avenue that we're good at to get the message out and make a change is the way we're going to actually be able to do that. So thank you very much for the afternoon, and take care of yourselves.